We're going to dive into our first session on achieving net zero, a commitment to our planet. To take the session forward, please welcome Mr. Ritesh Sachdev, Senior Vice President, Commercial Leasing and Asset Management India, Intellian Offices by Tata Realty. Let's put our hands together and give Mr. Sachdev a warm welcome. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, you can put your hands together and make some noise for Mr. Sachdev.
Am I audible now? One's at the back. Fantastic. I was just joking with my colleagues saying we've got this session, you've got this pitfall of a session. Should you take one which is right after the break and the one before lunch? So it's a double whammy. I can see the doors are closed. Most people are outside networking. Or should we frankly just continue and take a session between some of the other panel discussions? Maybe food for thought the next time, but ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Ritesh Sachdev, and I run the commercial leasing asset management, and over the last couple of days, I've also been given the responsibility of sustainability and CSR, if I may. So I run that for Intellian Offices, for Tata Realty nationally. What I plan to do is over the next 10 minutes, and again, reiterating, I'll keep myself brief, or rather, I'll be brief. We've got the session before lunch. Over the next 10 minutes and maybe 10 slides only, I will try and show a semblance or interconnection or direct relation, if I may, between growth of GCCs, which are primary absorbers of real estate in India now, and the contribution in a way that real estate has. We'll also talk about carbon emissions, we'll talk about net zero, etc., and how both of these are directly related. Over the next few slides, okay, now this is what I plan to do. We'll talk a little bit about the real estate markets. I spoke about the semblance. I'll give you a sense of that. We'll talk a little bit about how the real estate markets are changing. In this, I plan to talk a little bit about end-use occupiers. We'll speak about developers, and we'll also speak about investors. We, of course, need to be speaking about sustainability, how global corporations, GCCs, their disclosures, targets to net zero 2030, 40, 50. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about how sustainability and green is not just economic or an environmental prudence, but financial prudence as well. I promise not to speak beyond 30 seconds about Tata Realty, but we've done a lot there. I'd like to also talk a little bit about the proof of the pudding, as we call it. The first net zero asset in the country and only the 9th globally. I'll talk a little bit about that. And overall, how you need to intertwine those all put together. A very, very busy slide. Takeaways for you there is 2019 was a watershed moment for commercial real estate in India, where absorption levels were an all-time high of about 65 million square feet. 2 or 3 other things for you to take away. Post-COVID, unlike a lot of the other markets, recovery has been very encouraging. Recovery has been very robust. If I were to believe a few of my friends and IPCs, 2023 was almost similar to the 2019 levels. So over the last 3 years, we've now come back to absorbing 60 million square feet, which another data point is more absorption than all of the other Asian economies put together. That's how much India absorbs in top 7 cities in 1 year only. So 66 million square feet is your gross growth of grade A office spaces year on year. So the recovery has been robust. The second, of course, I need not preach to the choir, but IT services used to be the primary occupier or the primary absorber for office spaces, almost about 50%, not taking anything from there, but the growth that we've seen by GCCs over the last, I'd say, 5 years, extremely encouraging. From a development perspective, for us to, as developers say, pour concrete, brilliant. We've seen 30% absorbed over the last 5 years of the overall 60 million, that has now grown to 40%. And if I were to believe on a few researchers, this growth will continue. The other piece there, which is very encouraging, is almost about 60% plus of all new leasing has happened in green, sustainable, compliant developments. What that means is there is a clear flight to quality. Again, another busy slide, if I may, but what I've tried doing here is what's changing corporate real estate, what our occupiers or end users expecting, and what does it mean for developers. I won't speak too much about FDI growth, 70 billion continuing. The takeaway from a real estate perspective is 10% of the 70 billion is within real estate and related industries, and 50% of that 10% goes into commercial real estate. So a significant proportion there. What has changed again, as I mentioned, flight to quality. There is a big focus on premises, assets, environments that are well certified. So the focus from just the shell and core or the development earlier is now to the people, the environments that we operate in. Clearly it was services earlier, but now with the China Plus One, we're seeing a significant, I'd say, growth demand by manufacturing related industries. Some call it China Plus One. So you've now got services and you've now got manufacturing as well. That's what's driving growth. You guys are from businesses. I won't speak about availability of employable, technically qualified talent. That, of course, goes without saying. What does that mean from an occupier perspective? I've spoken about that. There is a clear shift to, and by the way, occupiers, end users are willing to pay for quality. What does it mean for developers? 10% of the overall stock that got or that was supplied in 2023 was green building, now which is twice as much as non-green developments. So it gives us tremendous visibility overall. India overall has about 650 million plus office stock. Now, 45, closer to 50% of that, as you'll see, is now green certified. That is one predominant shortlisting criteria, if I may, by large global multinational occupiers to look at real estate in India. So that's one key determinant. I won't speak about the growth that we've seen. Primarily GCC, the demand was from banking, financial services, and tech. What we've seen over the last, I'd say, 3 years, and again, you'll know this best, is pharma. We've seen auto, and we've also seen aviation life sciences. Now this slide, amongst all of the other slides, are equally important, but this talks about focus on sustainability, and more importantly, how real estate related construction impact or contribute to the carbon footprint overall amongst all of the other industries. A clear 38% there. If you were to add some of the other industries like a steel or a cement or some of the others, the unfortunate impact is almost as much as 60% plus of real estate related industries contribute to the carbon footprint in India. Why is that important? 40% plus of the Fortune 500 companies, 20% of the larger grade A occupiers in India have now committed to net zero by 2050 or earlier. Now, there was another very interesting stat that came about. Before I move to the next slide, I'll just leave it with you. The expectations that global occupiers have for them to go to net zero by 2030 vis-a-vis what developers can do, there is a 10-year gap. Global occupiers have net zero goals by as early as 2030, and the development or the developer community, frankly, will need till about 2040, if not later. So there is a substantial gap there that needs to be bridged. Moving on, we've spoken about occupier or end user preferences. We've spoken about the developer preferences, if I may. This talks about how sustainability also makes financial sense. 2, 3, 4 takeaways. Sorry, my slides have been busy. In a survey that was conducted of 300 large investors, 95, 98% plus said ESG goals will be an important criteria for them to invest. I spoke about earlier on how 50% of all real estate investment in India, which is 10 billion plus, is in commercial real estate. 85% would like to look at I'd say formal framework for them to arrive at the return on investments. So that's a no-brainer. From an occupier perspective, from a developer perspective, we use the word stickiness all the time, but we've seen a clear preference for global occupiers, end users, to continue with green, sustainable developments. Clear shift there. Return on investment, finally, CAGR, 10% year on year as compared to a non-sustainable green development. So it clearly makes financial sense there. Okay, as I mentioned very quickly about Intellion offices, we're a 100% subsidiary of Tata Sons. We've been in the business of development for the last 40 odd years in retail, residential, commercial. We've developed about 32 million. We've got about 35 million square feet under development in all grade A cities in the country. We like to keep things very simple. We'd like to be your partner of choice. And we design our developments around 4 simple pillars only. Our developments are smart, secure, safe, and sustainable. Now, a little bit about Project Alingan. I know this is extremely important because Tata Sons, we're a 100% subsidiary of Tata Sons, and Tata's and all of its group companies contribute to almost about 3 to 4% of India's GDP overall per se, and therefore the importance of the private sector in reducing carbon emissions. Tata Sons have got very ambitious targets to drive net zero, to pioneer circular economy, and to preserve biodiversity. Within Intellion offices, we've picked up the same 3 parameters under our ESG goals. I'll move to the next slide where I like to fondly call it our report card. Now this really is the proof. The first piece under environment, I think extremely important because a 12-year-old development, which is Ramanujan Intellion Park in Chennai, is the first net zero development in the country and 9th globally. Takeaways: we built for the future. Financially, it has more than paid back. Our investor partners are delighted. If there is a will, there is a way. 100% of our commercial water liquid discharge, as you can see, there is no discharge. So it is all recycled per se. 0 fatalities, loss of life, some of the other things. I call this the scorecard. If any of you would like this deck, I'll be very happy to share. Now, 3, 4 quick takeaways on what I call as the proof of the pudding. 13-year-old asset, reduction in energy consumption by 40% plus overall as compared to parameters that have been set. 95% plus of all of the power that we used were from green sources, and we're delighted with that. 30% less water consumption, and I'll talk a little bit about that perhaps further, and we've reduced 25% of savings by using material that have less embodied carbon and are secured, I'd say, within less than 100 kilometers. Uh, a prudent point, it's difficult for you to make improvements in a development that you've built. Now, that is the proof of the pudding, extremely difficult. We now are not just net zero, but we are well certified as well. I'll talk a little bit about that, but the journey needs to start from design stage. It needs to start from a site selection stage. 3-4 quick takeaways for people who are in Bangalore. During monsoons, we've heard of tree felling. Now, that's the importance of planting native species which are immune to, I'd say, the climatic conditions of that city. Gurugram is a classic example of what we call is heat island, where you've got exposed concrete. All of you would have read a couple of days back, even today, I heard the nighttime temperatures in Gurgaon are almost up to 40 to 43%. That's again a classic example of how you need to have solar passive design. Again, not talking about any developer, but glass facades overall are not native or the requirement to our country because of the extreme, I'd say, heat conditions that are prevalent. They raise the requirements of air conditioning, drive up energy, drive up requirements of chill water, etc., etc. So you need to incorporate all of these as you look at designing developments and acquiring assets. Finally, the one final thing actually, you have a lot of certifications out there. And how do you keep those things simple? We call it the gold standard. Of course, net zero, we've got a commitment of having 70% of all of our developments, frankly, till 2030 should be net zero. We've got 3. From a development perspective, LEED Platinum. All of our portfolio is LEED Platinum. We've moved from development to people who work within these developments, and therefore, I'm delighted to also share that we've taken our goal further. Ours, Ramanujan and Teleon Park, is the only Platinum V2 development in the country. And I keep on reiterating, that's a 12-year-old asset. We've done that. And finally, from an investor perspective, all of those ratings are available transparently on GRESB. That's the third parameter that we follow. I'd like to finally close my presentation, if I call it, with what Anne Bonu has said. We don't need 100 people doing ESG imperfectly or perfectly, rather. We need thousands, if not more, doing ESG imperfectly. Thank you very much.